talk, and feel free to get verklempt.
Yeah.
I'm a
So that's
little
Dating
she's
myself.
documenting like 10 years of the decline and ideologically and
Yes,
otherwise.
yes, and it is such a well-produced trailer. Production value is extremely high, and I don't think it's going to cost a lot. I don't think the budget is super high, but that's what we're doing some pretty aggressive fundraising for now. So that was one of the purposes of that event,
What was the
was
Mm,
name
to
of
raise
the
money.
documentary again?
The Antidote.
Hmm.
mm,
Interesting name, but
yeah.
yeah, and it's very tongue, and it's great because it's a nice balance of data and really like sobering, heartfelt stories, but also humor. Um, I mean, some of the sound bites are just kind of really cheeky, and so I really have high hopes for it if we can just get it off the ground.
That's awesome. Do you want to give
Yeah.
another quick synopsis for those who missed hearing about what it was?
Well, yes, it's a documentary that FAIR is helping to sponsor the production of and to assist in fundraising for. It's by Julie Aguilar, and it's called The Antidote, and it sort of documents the decline of Broadway over the past 10 years due
Mm.
to intolerance and groupthink. It really started intensifying during the pandemic, separate and apart from DEI, but just during the pandemic, there are a lot of artists like Clifton Duncan who were alienated and really just canceled because of vaccine mandates. So
Mm,
right. So the documentary sort of dives into why this is happening. It seems that there's a very progressive slash regressive agenda in amongst funders of of theater, and they're more interested in sort of furthering a social political agenda rather than creating art that appeals to a broad cross section of Americans and that is commercially viable. So the question is, what is the future of Broadway if we continue on this path? Apparently, just attendance just down like considerably over the past 5 years. Even it's just really plummeting,
wow.
like almost as bad as MSNBC and CNN. I'm sure you've heard that's
Hmm.
happening to them in the last few days,
Yes.
or last few weeks.
Yes.
Well, I wonder if that is a trend that's across all forms of cinematic art, because I was shocked
Yeah.
about I guess it was about 10 years ago or so when I was kind of going through my daughter's vaccine injury and learning a lot more about propaganda and how a lot of these things, these medical products that actually do have benefits and risks, but are presented as if they only
Wow.
have benefits.
Yes.
I was kind of untangling some of the propaganda around this, and I found that the CDC actually gives giant grants to any movies that will include pro vaccine content
I
and
did not
other
know that.
yeah, and so there's a massive
Wow.
like budget for creative projects that include promotion of not just vaccines but other sorts of things that the government wants to promote in the culture. And so at some point it's kind of like
That's
product
insane.
placement, right?
Exactly.
But it sort of takes over plot lines.
That would explain what I've seen on a lot of television. I work in television
Okay.
as well as heading an organization. But what I've seen in television is a lot of like not I wouldn't say plot lines, but a lot of offhanded comments about how people who don't get vaccinated or they're part of the terrorist group or whatever. You just lump them in as the people who think Elvis is still alive and believe in Sasquatch. Oh, and they won't get vaccinated either. And it's just sort of like an easy way of describing a crazy person and
Hmm.
and scripts. So
I came across that in a television show I was watching for a while where they kind of actually made fun of the vaccine hesitant. So people that
yes,
just were
that's
had hesitations,
yes.
right? And I stopped watching it. I was never able to get back into it because I was so
Wow.
irritated that they brought that into the storyline. And I just haven't been able to, so I haven't seen it for the last several seasons, but right at the beginning with all of the, vaccine stuff that was coming out, they just had a little bit, of a plot line about people that were
Yeah.
vaccine hesitant and the conspiracy theorists that were around the
Yes.
hesitation of the vaccine, all that. Yeah. So
All that
I'm
happens a lot.
familiar.
Well, I'm not
And I
Yeah.
ready to.
think big pharma is a, I'm sorry, big pharma is a huge contributor to a lot of the advertising. I'm sure you like Sunday morning talk
Yeah.
shows
Yes.
on
Yes.
MSNBC. Yeah, and
Yeah.
I think the United States is one of maybe one or two countries, or maybe the only country
It's
that
New
allows
Zealand is the other one.
New Zealand that allows pharmaceutical companies to advertise. And I don't believe,
Oh,
testing
wow.
my FCC history now, I don't believe that it was always the case that big pharma could advertise. I think it's a relatively recent phenomenon, maybe in the last 30 years or something. But
Wow.
I've gone down this, I don't want to call it a rabbit hole, but this avenue
Mhm.
considerably, I think, since COVID. And I don't think it's widely known that 75% of the FDA's budget comes from big pharma in the form of fees, product review fees, just assessment fees, not taxpayers. And I think
Mm.
one of the big changes that I would love to see happen, and hopefully it will under RFK, assuming he's confirmed. I hope he is. But one of the big changes we could see happening is if pharma is like most agencies is funded primarily by taxpayer dollars and not by private industry. Because you imagine like the Department of Education being funded by like outside think tanks or something like that. It's just really strange that we allow this.
Yes.
Yeah, absolute
Yes.
corruption. It's a
Absolutely.
recipe for corruption. Yeah.
Yes.
Well, it is
Yes.
Monday, November 18th, and welcome to Solid Ground. Thank you for joining us in the chat, everybody. It's nice to see so many names. I can't see faces, but I see names. And we are joined by Monica Harris of FAIR. We spoke with you, Monica, I think it was back in September, if I'm
Yes,
not
it was
mistaken. Yeah,
a
and it was
couple
a
months ago.
great
Yes.
conversation. We really enjoyed having you on, so we're delighted to be able to have you back with us again today. And Deborah, would you like to start us off with the intro to Solid Ground?
Yes, excuse my voice. Solid Ground is a peer support community for anyone concerned about the imposition of critical social justice and/or authoritarian measures such as COVID mandates in their workplace, university, children's school, or community. We offer weekly online peer support groups in which members share ideas, thoughts, and support for how to navigate the impact of these ideologies and answer the question, where do we go from here? You can join one of our groups for only $5 per month. To find out how to join our community, please visit solidgroundsupport.com. And please note that Solid Ground does not provide psychotherapy or legal advice, and nothing we do should be construed as such.
Thanks very much, Deborah. And thank you, Point Curation, for the super sticker. That's awesome. Thank you so much.
Ah,
The conversation we were just having about media influence seems to really tie neatly into something that I have been very curious to explore with you, Monica. And that is you had a conversation with Megan Daum, I believe, a few months back, or I don't know at what point you had that, but I listened to it when I was trying to learn a little bit more about you before we spoke to you the first time. And one of the things you talked about was the way that you discovered your son was getting exposed to really explicit content online. And I think it was really jarring as a mother to hear
ah,
your
yes.
story of how that happened. And I've been curious to hear more about what that was like and what you discovered in the process of uncovering that.
Yeah. So this happened during the pandemic, I guess, right at the start, April of 2020, May, so the spring of 2020. And at the time, our son was in fifth grade, and he didn't really he we gave him limited access to an iPad when we went on long trips, but he didn't have a phone, and we refused to give him a phone, and he did not even have a laptop. So when the pandemic hit, I had to dig up one of my old spare, barely working, MacBook Pros, and we were trying to make it work remotely like everyone else. And he would get these assignments, which I'm sure if you have a child, if you're a parent, you've all heard about these assignments. You've all, oh, there we go. Um, it's homework, but it's not really homework because what it amounts to is just do we want to take a break for the siren to?
Is that your siren?
But,
Is it
no,
No,
is
it's
that's
it in
not
me.
your
me.
area? Where is that?
Oh,
Oh, okay.
oh, it's
Awesome.
gone. All right.
Yeah.
So I hesitate to call it homework because literally it was almost like busy work. They would get an assignment to, let's just say, tell us about the origin, or find out, describe the origins of the Brazilian rainforest, something like that. Just very broad, not very specific. And the bottom line is, it would require the student not to go to a library, obviously, but spend quite a bit of time online on, Google, Safari, whatever,
Wow.
and which seemed fine. But what the teacher did, and she was a wonderful teacher, she'd been teaching for 40 years, we loved her. But what she did in good faith was provide a series of resources and links that students could, sort of a jumping off point, which was helpful. But what we later learned happened, and we were only able to deconstruct this by going through his history, was that when students would go to these links that seemed relatively harmful about, like, the Amazon rainforest, there were links embedded at the bottom that would take them to other sites. And these sites, the links would be something harmless, like, learn more about the rainforest here, or, it was, they were like hyperlinks that seemed tangentially related to the topic that what child was interested in. So when they hyperlinked, it would bring them to a site that was, again, still tangentially related to the topic, but it would start to introduce characters, like cartoon characters, like really friendly looking, colorful characters. And they would, and again, I'm trying to recreate this the best I can, but they would introduce them to games that would involve, that particular subject, like the Amazon rainforest. But while they were in the process of introducing them to these games, they would sort of inject certain language, sexually, and not to begin with, not sexually explicit, but just, pointing out that, oh, this is my butt, or, oh, these are my, let me give you a kiss, or, these are my boobs, or whatever, things like that. And it would just, like, it would be very brief in the context of the game, and then they get back to the game. But it was almost like a seeding. And then what I noticed in my son's history, this is again later going back and deconstructing what he did, he wouldn't initially be interested in it. He would click away from the site, like, oh, this isn't what I want. And he would again try to get back to the rainforest material. But it's almost like an algorithm that once he clicked, he was captured. So again, as he's trying to, like, continue his research, his work, these links keep appearing. And what happens is they become increasingly more explicit with each detour, to finally, and I, again, in the history, it occurred really quickly, like within a week and a half, according to what I was tracking. Finally, he was directed to soft porn sites. And they weren't with real people, they were with cartoon characters. And then the cartoon characters later morphed to characters who looked sort of AI-like, who were so real, but they weren't real people. And by the time I happened to catch him one night, because I couldn't sleep, and I walked past his room, and I saw a light under his door, and I went in. I just kind of knocked, and he looked at me like, and the look on his face, I can't even begin to explain. It was a look of embarrassment, but he looked sleep deprived. He looked anxious. He looked depressed. It almost looked like he'd been doing this for hours, and he was worn out, and he almost looked relieved that I found him. It was the strangest sensation as a mother. So I immediately looked at what he was looking at, and it was incredibly graphic, and so graphic that, I mean, I just don't want to describe it. But I didn't get angry with him, because I couldn't get angry with him, because I knew he was only in fifth grade.
Oh,
I knew I. No, it's hard for me to talk about, but I tried to explain to him that I'm not upset. I asked him how this had happened, and he was having trouble explaining how it had happened. So I took his laptop. I told my partner, and again, we tried not to get very angry, but we spent the rest of the night crying after we put him to bed, because it's so incredibly painful. Anyway, when we told his teacher about it, she was completely unaware, and I that made me wonder how many I would not have even known about this had I not happened to be up late, just walking by his room. And it made me wonder how many other parents in his class were completely unaware of what was happening. And it's very targeted, it's very intentional. These kids are lured. This is not, I mean, I'm just going to say something that's all, it's, I don't know if it's not reckless. it's not as reckless as I'm sure you've heard about the Wicked toy. There was
Yes.
Yes,
yes,
on
was
the
it a
Yes.
boxes.
was it a doll
Yes.
or was it yes?
It,
And
it
how in
was
the
a
world
doll. Mattel.
you want to explain that? It was a doll, and there was a website linked on the actual packaging
And
that linked
it
to an adult site.
to a porn. Yes.
Oh,
Yes.
yes.
Yes,
Yes. It was a huge, well, what they called a huge
What?
accident. Who knows what
an
happened or how that
accident.
came to be, but they called it an accident. Yes.
On packaging that this packaging is very expensive, and you can imagine if you were putting out any product, especially one that's that that huge, representing a brand like that, you would
Yeah, it was
imagine you
Mattel.
would at
Yeah,
least
it was
do
Mattel for the movie Wicked.
Mattel.
Yeah, just so people know.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yes. Why would someone not at least double check the link many times before putting that on packaging? So you start to wonder, is it just negligence? Is it just recklessness? What's going on here? But
Mm.
yeah, so that was my experience, and
Ooh.
we have it led us down a path where we probably should have done what we did something we probably should have done much earlier with our son, but you never think that you have to have these conversations with your child when they're in fifth grade. You think, oh, maybe
Mm.
when they're in middle school, going into high school. I don't know, but we started telling him, teaching him about like, all right, sex is healthy, sex is good, but there's a difference between sex and pornography. And
Mm-hmm.
this is why pornography is bad. And it's really surreal having this conversation with children who
Mm-hmm.
haven't even gone through puberty, but we were sort of forced into it. Um, and thankfully, I'm so happy to say that based on this our ongoing engagement with him and our just having these frank and honest conversations with him, that he now has a girlfriend, and
Mm-hmm.
he's extremely. What we've learned is he is. I don't know if this is part of a. I don't think this is a generational trend, but he's actually becoming rather conservative. I'm not talking about Newt Gingrich conservative at all.
Mm-hmm.
He's like more like a child from the 70s or the
Mm-hmm.
80s.
Hmm.
His girlfriend just had a birthday, and he got her. He made a bracelet for her. And when my partner took him to the drugstore to get a card, he didn't get one of these punchy cards, the kind that are like, have this sort of like dark humor, or the cards that
Mm-hmm.
kids like nowadays. He literally picked a card I would have picked for my mother, with the
Oh.
flowers and with the cursive and with the heart on the special, more expensive rack. And he holds the door open for her, and
So
I don't
sweet.
know.
Aw.
Yes, he's a real gentleman, and then he really values the in-person relationship with her. He can't wait to see her every weekend. And it just reminded me that, these kids are so impressionable, and if you just take the time to put them on the right path, they want to be on the right path, and they want our help and support. And it doesn't take much, but you do have to be incredibly conscious about what your kids are doing now. You cannot tune out. And
Mm-hmm.
unfortunately, the pandemic was good in some ways, obviously, for, it raised our awareness as parents about what's really happening in our schools. But I think for a lot of parents, they just tuned out even more. So
Wow.
anyway, that's my story. It did have a happy ending.
Wow.
Gosh, when you describe how he looked when you opened the door, that
Mm.
I have a son who's 13, and I can imagine that. And it's really heartbreaking.
Yeah.
It's a nightmare to think that your kid has been exposed to this stuff. I mean, this is before he's ever had a chance to experience any kind of
Yeah.
organic sexuality in any way. He's too young for that. And now you see him seeing things that, as you say, you don't even want to describe it because it sounds like it was
It's
quite
horrible.
intense.
That
And
I wouldn't have even in my entire adult life, he was looking at stuff that I'd never even seen. That was
Mm.
what was so frightening. It was at
Ugh.
next level.
Mm.
yeah. And the amount of violence in pornography that and I'm not a porn consumer,
Yes.
and I have never been, but this is what you're hearing from people who
Hmm.
do look into what's going on in porn.
Yes.
It's changed the way that young people are interacting sexually. I mean,
Yeah.
there's a huge number of young
Mm-hmm.
women who have experienced spontaneous sexual violence from partners that are consuming violent content, and the number of women who think it's normal to experience
Yes.
violence during sex now.
Yeah.
It's it's really escalated tremendously because of this online streaming porn and the ready availability of it.
Yeah, it seems like there would be such an easy fix for it too. I don't understand why there are not more government efforts to put pressure on these platforms and tech companies to. Well, here's another thing that I found interesting, and I don't know if you or anyone listening has experienced this, but we finally did break down and get our son a phone in ninth grade. We had been hoping to hold out until he was in college, but you know that wasn't possible. And the only reason we broke down was because in most schools now you actually need a laptop or a phone to even get assignments, to get
Right.
alerts about, which is that's
Right.
another level of insanity that's even needed. It's bad enough that they don't have textbooks, but they rely on these devices. So we got him a phone, and what was it? What was one of the first things that? Oh my God, I'm losing my train of thought here about what happened with this phone. But he ah I forgot what I was gonna
It'll
say.
come. I'm sure
Unfortunately,
it'll come to
yeah,
you. It'll
yeah,
come to
Mhm.
you. One of the things I was so impressed with about your
yeah,
story when you were describing it
yeah.
to Megan Dom, and then when you just described it in greater detail here to us, was the effort that you went to track back. How did this happen?
Oh yes.
I mean,
Oh, actually,
that's. Go ahead.
I did remember. I'm
Okay,
sorry.
good.
We'll get back to the tracking back.
Yeah.
So we got our son a phone, and again, I don't know how many of you have children with phones, but one of the first things we wanted to do was make sure that we have a program in place, whether it's Apple Screen Time or a third-party app, to monitor his activity to make sure he wasn't going to be on the phone for 15 hours a day, to make sure he could only visit certain sites. And one of the first things we learned is that the Apple's built-in screen time site is horrible. You put in
Mm.
filters, and the next day would disappear, or they would constantly reset to 24 hours. And I would go online and say, ask, is it just me or other parents having trouble? Tons of complaints from parents like, Apple, why aren't you doing better? This is useless. So then you spend time for a third party app.
Mm-hmm.
And what you quickly realize is that if your child is over the age of, I think it's like 9 or 10, some ridiculously young age, they have privacy rights that you can't violate on tech. That when they create accounts, if you do not, if you are not an administrator on their account from the very beginning, if you just give them a phone, like anyone else would have a phone, and they create their own account, you as a parent cannot come in later and try to change those
Wow.
settings, because they're considered adults for technology purposes, and they have
Wow.
privacy rights that cannot be violated, even though they're minors and even though you're paying for the phone. It was
Oh,
That's ridiculous.
astounding.
wow.
Yeah.
Wow.
So anyway, just
Wow.
that was an aside. But
There's
getting back to, yeah, go ahead.
Well, there's a
Woo.
there's one setting you can turn on, and I just learned this from a family, parents that were clients of mine who had a child who was accessing a lot of really alarming stuff, and the dad showed me that you can turn on assistive access on an iPhone, and
Oh,
that
sister.
severely limits what you're able to do. I guess it's for, he said it was designed for like seniors or mentally
Oh,
challenged people who really need a simpler sort of format. It's
oh,
not
right.
perfect because there's some things that you can't do that you want to let your kids do, like send photos. I mean, my boys take pictures
Yeah,
and they want to send them to their sister, and you
sure.
can't do that, So there's some limitations that are, they should fix it. They really should make it a little bit less limited, but it is a
But,
very,
yeah,
it reduces your phone to a very limited screen that only allows the apps that you select as a parent. And I don't have Safari selected, so there's no, they don't have their own phone, but they do have a phone that I leave available to them to listen to Audible or to listen to Spotify
Hmm.
on.
yeah, that's
And,
fine. Yeah,
so they have a
and that
really
makes
limited
sense.
access to a phone, my old phone, and I have it set on assistive access. So that might be something parents would like to
That's good
look
to
into.
know. Assistive access. Yeah.
Yeah.
Someone
Um,
would make money solving this. I mean, I don't know if they're thinking, let's just get a bunch of kids as users and that's going to make us money. But I imagine parents would pay a lot for a good product. So, you know,
I think that they're probably thinking that there's more money to be made by just getting
milk it
these
out of the
kids
kids.
addictive.
Yeah.
Yeah, I
Yeah.
don't think
Get
enough
their
parents are
data, get all
concerned.
their data. Yeah.
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 But
Mhm.
to your point about what we learned as we were, tracking his history, I think the biggest takeaway that I had was that he did not go down this path willingly.
Mhm.
It was easy to check as we were tracking his site history that he would click on these links and he would quickly click away to, the work, the sites he was supposed to be at. He was lured, and it was just the link, the bait was just thrown again and again and again, until at some point, maybe a week and a half into this trap, I'll call it a trap, he finally
Mhm.
succumbed, and that's when he started spending more time on these porn sites. So it's very deliberate, in my opinion.
And how long had he been seeing the really explicit stuff at the point where you found out?
Thank God it was less than a week. I think it was like 5 days. It was like divine intervention that I just woke up that night and happened to walk by, because I swear I don't know how I would have known otherwise. I just don't.
Mhm. Yeah.
Because it never occurred to me, and for a child that a child in fifth grade would be doing this. I knew at some point, I assumed maybe like when he was in ninth grade or something like that, maybe even eighth grade, that I'd have to start keeping a closer watch. But at fifth grade, it just never entered my mind.
Yeah.
And after talking to parents, I've now learned, and not just doing parents, but research, fifth grade is the most common age at which kids are introduced to porn now.
Oh,
And that's
It,
around
hap- it,
11,
Wow.
11 years
it
old.
happens earlier,
Hmm.
yeah, and it does happen. I've talked to some parents.
Sure.
One of our friends, fourth grade, she was having trouble fourth grade with her son, but fifth is the average. Very frightening.
That's incredible.
Wow.
What a
Yeah.
I find this so disturbing, and I find it also like there's like a trans mod that you can do for Minecraft. I just
Oh,
learned, yeah, like there's the way to give your character estrogen, and then they grow boobs, and they get some special power. And
oh my
there's these
God.
messages are inserted into a lot of things that our kids are consuming. And
Yeah.
the idea when you even just when you first mentioned that the school was sending your kid on Google searches, that I mean, there's
Yeah.
you just type a word wrong. And what did my son? We were at the public library a while back, and he typed in something. What was it? It was something tank, because he was really into tanks. I mean, he was into
Yeah,
like,
like military tanks.
yeah,
Like,
like he
okay,
knew
yeah,
all the
yeah.
different kinds. He was painting little models. Oh, he typed in model tank. That's right. And then all these like images. And
Tank
we're
Oh
at the
tops.
public
gosh.
library, and it wasn't pornography, but it was really suggestive stuff with
Yeah.
women posing and little very scantily clad. And here's my kid just looking at this like, luckily I was standing there, but I felt really frustrated that a little kid can just go search, and he's innocently thinking, I want to look up some information about a model tank, and he's getting like Instagram models in tanks, little tiny bathing suits and things. And so
I, I think this is happening because kids don't have access to textbooks anymore, which, and I don't know when that started. Again, until you're a parent, like my kid's 15. So, between college and, in 1988 and having a child, I had no idea what was going on. I just assumed textbooks were still a thing. You remember when we used to go to the bookstore and you take a
Yeah.
paper bag and actually
yeah,
make your
and you
book
wrap
covers
your
out
book.
of it?
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
And it
It
was
was an
fun. It
exciting,
was fun to do that. You
it was
could make
fun.
it creative and draw on it.
Yeah.
And oh
To
yeah,
draw
I
on
had a
it, make it your
blast.
own. All that's gone. I mean, they're taking notes on computers and they're not learning, how to write cursive. But it's the lack of textbooks. And when I talk to every teacher I've talked to, whether it's our son's private school or now that he's in public school, they lament that, oh no, we just that's just not what we're doing anymore. It's all online. And there doesn't seem to be any will to change this. And so I was having lunch with a professor. I graduated from Princeton, and I was reconnecting with our alumni group recently, and I had lunch with a professor in New York last week, and I was talking about like, do asking him, one of my greatest thrills every fall at college was going to the bookstore and buying the books. And he
Mhm.
says that doesn't really happen as much anymore. Like even in colleges and universities, everything is online.
oh,
And I said, why is that? And he said it's because textbooks and I don't think this is just at the college level. I think it's probably a pressure at K through 12 as well. Textbooks are incredibly expensive now.
Yeah.
He said a
Yes.
history textbook was like $600 that he wanted
What?
for his class. Yes. So he had
Yes.
Oh
to,
my God.
and I'm thinking this is crazy that now we are being priced out of textbook education and being pushed online.
It's interesting because I was a college professor too at one point. Very recently, I resigned from that. But the textbooks I chose, the administration came to me and said they're either too expensive and the students won't take your class if you require that they purchase this particular book. It needs to be made available online somehow, or that we basically created a policy where no teacher is no student is required to purchase them at all in any class. So either
Wow.
some way to get this to them, or you let us go through the online library, whatever it was. It was my responsibility to go and change the books so that they could get them online. They were not going to allow for that any longer, and the students wouldn't be able to take the courses anyhow, because if they thought the books were too expensive, they wouldn't purchase them. That was the culture then that started to become created around
And when was
textbooks.
this? When was this? How long?
So this was in 2016, the first time I came
Okay.
across it. Yep. So it started changing. I mean, I think a few years ago, more recently now, obviously, but even back almost 10 years ago, 9 years
Hmm.
ago, it was already starting this whole process of the textbooks being too expensive, and they're expensive for a reason. You need to adjust so that your students will take your class.
Hmm.
I
I
just
was,
don't
Yeah,
think you can learn. I don't think you can learn as effectively online. I mean, I don't have a
no.
you
master's in
can.
education.
Well, there's
I
too many
just
Yes,
so
I
distractions
agree.
too.
right.
Yeah,
So
I was in community college back in the 2000s, I guess, and then law school in the late 2000s, like 2009-ish.
okay.
That was where I first saw textbooks getting really expensive. Probably university, and then well, law doesn't count. That's its own thing. But
Yeah,
university,
that
right
is. Yeah.
before I went to law school, they had gotten so expensive that I actually had books that were costing close to $100 for a used book.
For a used book.
Yeah, in the bookstore. So there was this buyback thing where they would buy it back, but they would
Wow.
only buy it back for like 20% of what you paid for it. And so it
Oh
was
my
like this really expensive rental, actually. And
Wow.
they were having to change them. And I don't know what this is. I don't know if this is just people capitalizing on the higher education system, that there's kind of a handshake deal between the textbook manufacturers and the
Mm,
people designing curriculum, where
hmm.
they were redoing. So you might have like edition 4 of this book, but now that your teacher's using edition 5, but
Yes.
sometimes you could bring in the fourth edition
Hmm.
and it would be the exact same content, but some photos were rearranged or the chapter was in a slightly different order. Do you remember this,
Yes.
Christine? Does that
I
ring?
do. This is how, yeah, that's how it was still operating too, where
Yeah.
I'd have students sometimes say, "Can I bring in a third edition?" Even though we were at edition 4 or 5, I would allow for it because I felt like I didn't want these kids, well, students, they were adults. But
Yeah.
anyway, I didn't want anybody getting taken advantage of in that way. That's exactly what would happen. They would change something ever so slightly, call it a new edition, and
And
therefore everything
require it.
before that's yeah, and they require it, and then everything before that's obsolete. It was
I mean,
just
this get
thievery. I mean, thievery.
it gets into a discussion that I know this is totally off the I mean off the path of what we're discussing now, but whenever I have these conversations about anything, whether it's pharma or education or whatever, it all seems to come back. This is my rallying cry. It has been for 10 years. It all goes back to the money.
Yes.
Money is, I'm not saying money is the root, money is not the root of all evil, but it is the root of all control. And it determines everything in our life, our
I
access
agree.
to education, the kind of education, housing, you know, medicine, and just all of it. And when you have whoever controls the money, the media, they can control what we think, and it's the most, it's the weirdest thing to me that everyone wants money, but no one really thinks about literally how it controls every aspect of our lives. And I was talking to my partner the other day about like money even affects the way we treat each other. There, back in the day when we had one a single parent or a single wage owner or wage earner. Granted, it was a man; those weren't great days, I know, but a single wage earner who had a 9 to 5, had time to spend with the family, and a mom who had time to raise kids. And then we got women's liberation, which is a wonderful thing, but it just meant that you had two people working to create the same standard of living, and the kids just weren't supported as much. And then we go to both parents working, you know, and that's still not enough. So then we have the rise of credit cards to fill in gaps so we can go on
Mhm.
vacations and do other things that our savings won't account for. And then at a certain point, that's not enough. And then what do we have? We have like housing booms that, your house no longer is your home. Your house is an investment. So you can
It's your
take out home
ATM.
equity line. These
Mhm.
home equity line of credits, they didn't even exist 50 years ago. Your
Mhm.
house was where you slept and made your family.
Mhm.
And now we're at a point where two jobs aren't enough, that we have people working one job or two or three jobs, three, you know what I'm saying? It is,
Yes.
and the cost is that it makes our days get shorter. We can't invent more hours in the day. We only have 24 hours in the day, right? So it just means we have less time for ourselves, less time for each other, which fuels the online connection. Because one of the problems of connecting in person is you have to put in extra effort. It requires time. It requires
Yeah.
getting in your car. It requires gas. So a lot of people don't think about it. I think about it a lot, but this quest for money has, especially as money becomes more devalued, inflation, means that we have less time in our lives to do the things that make us happy and that keep us connected, and we spend more time chasing digits on a screen. And I
Mhm.
don't know where it's going to end up, but it's completely changing the way humans interact with each other and our society.
And less time to raise your kids or to spend time with your kids, more dependency
Yeah,
on teachers to just give them their assignments and they'll take care of it.
that's
And,
right.
I've got my second or third job I've got to get to. I
Yeah,
mean, I was thinking about like just being a latchkey kid, what that means. I was a latchkey kid in the 80s. It just basically meant both my parents worked, so they weren't there to drop us off in the morning or pick us up
yeah,
from school in the afternoon. So we were, reliant on my sister and I just figuring out, how to get dinner made, how to get things done. My parents were immigrants. They didn't speak the language for a long time. And so
yeah.
we but we didn't have access to the stuff that kids have access to now. I don't know how different it would have been for us if we'd had the
Oh,
internet and
yeah.
all of these different things to connect online. I think it could have been a complete disaster. I feel like we kind of made it through because we didn't have those things. And if we wanted to play
Oh,
with our
interesting.
friends, they were in the neighborhood, we played with our friends. But I think that if we had had this digital age and I'd had an Instagram account or followed friends that way, would have been a horrible outcome for me. I just, knowing who I was as a young kid, as a
Yeah,
child,
your
it would have
weaknesses.
been,
Yeah.
yeah, it would have been terrible for me. So I can completely see what you're talking about, and it just leaves less time to really be engaged as a parent. I mean, so many parents don't have the time to be as engaged probably as they should be. I
Yeah.
mean,
I think it's even the unspoken. It's the elephant in the room with immigration as well. I think during this election, there was this tendency to think of people who didn't want immigrants, illegal immigrants, not legal, illegal immigrants here, as they were racist, they were xenophobic. Although I think we saw from exit polling that immigration was one of the major motivating factors for people of color who voted for Trump, because
That's right.
yes,
their communities are being impacted more than the
That's
upper class white
correct.
communities. And
that's
so
right.
yeah, and I was reflecting on it the other day, and I thought that one of the justifications we've been hearing from Bill Clinton and Bill Gates and others is that, well, we need immigrants to do the jobs that Americans won't do. Instead of asking ourselves, why aren't Americans doing these jobs? Why don't they want these jobs? Oh, they don't pay a living wage. Well, they're demanding too much, is what we're told. I don't think they're demanding too much. I think it's inflation, which has been
Hmm.
going on for decades. It's built into this monetary system. It's just gotten worse since the pandemic. But inflation has not it's not kept pace with the ability of people to just make a live, just to keep food on the table and to have the quality of life their parents did. And for that, it seems they're being penalized because their needs are too high. If you want to live the way your mother lived and your father lived, that's like sort of an inflated expectation. So what happens is that over the years, when the quality of life becomes too expensive for the average American, what this our government, the system has done is found substitute labor. So it
Mhm.
happened with NAFTA, right? Bill
Yeah.
Clinton brought in NAFTA, and that gutted the manufacturing industry in the community in the United States. Outsourcing to, I mean, look at anything you wear; it's made in Indonesia or Vietnam or
Mm-hmm.
Mexico. And then when that got, there reached a point where even like I think um, some manufacturers like Walmart realize that, oh, we need to even undercut Indonesia. Let's go to Sri Lanka. It's always about finding the next cheapest labor. So I think a lot of the reason these immigrants are coming over now is because they are literally going to do the jobs that it's not that Americans don't want to do, but it's Americans can no longer afford to do and make a living. And sadly, a lot of young people, particularly, have decided, look, if I can't have the life my parents lived, then I'm just they become very disillusioned. They decide that they don't want to work much at all. Why work if you're
Yes.
not going to have a retirement,
Hmm.
if you're
Hmm.
not going to have a home, if you'll never own a car? Why do any of this?
Hmm.
Whereas if you bring over an immigrant has no expectations, they're coming from a tyrannical country where they may not even may have 20 people living in a two-bedroom structure.
Yes.
They come to the United States and they're like, this is fantastic. This is manna from heaven. Like, wow, I only have to work 10 hours a day and I can make $30,000 a year. I've hit the jackpot. So we're bringing over people with lower expectations to keep this economy running.
100%.
Yeah,
Yes.
and I
I
think we
just
need to be
Yeah,
honest with it.
I just
Yeah.
looked up an inflation
very well said.
calculator, and in 1980, $5,000 is today worth in today's dollars would be worth $19,154.
That's crazy.
Wow.
That is
Wow.
crazy.
Tremendous, tremendous.
I just we need to start having a conversation. There's so many conversations I feel like we're starting to have: food and health and drug safety and efficacy. That's a big one. Thank you RFK for that. But the biggest conversation we need to have is who controls our money? Where is this money coming from? Um, and why is it that every year we have to work harder for the same money? It's not right. And we can't, it's not sustainable. And I'm waiting. I don't know if Trump will start talking about it. I'm hopeful. I didn't see Kamala Harris talking about it at all. I think the only presidential candidate I've ever seen talk about it is Ross Perot, like in
Mm.
1990. But it's something that
Right.
both
Yeah.
parties assiduously distance themselves from. No one wants to talk about it. But yet,
Mhm.
it is literally the cause of all of the issues that plague Americans. So, just a
Mm.
just a side note that
Mm. Absolutely.
Yeah, I think that's really important.
There's the class element on this. Just a quick thing, and I also was thinking about what FAIR is doing with health and medicine. It might be an interesting thing to talk about, but I've been seeing that in some ways the Democrats, who are like the wealthier people, have actually been benefiting from all of this immigrant labor because they can have
yeah,
the nanny, they can have the gardener, they can have, or
yeah,
living in a city where I don't actually order Uber, but like people. So that in some ways, there's been as much as the Democrats would be like, we're concerned about these immigrants, we care about this. There's a benefit to them to be having a lot of the immigrant labor for their
oh
lifestyle.
yeah,
So they, right. Like, I mean, I just go out in the street. I'm near the JCC, and there's all the kids come for daycare, and there's this. Everyone comes with a stroller, and pretty much, I can say this, eyeballing it. I think probably most people are originally from somewhere else that are all the nannies, like pushing
yeah,
the little
yeah,
strollers.
Mm-hmm.
And so I don't know what it would. That'll be very interesting if we can actually even these things out more. If the upper classes have to start paying for what they're getting, all these benefits.
yeah. That will be interesting to see. I think the fascinating thing about this election. I was watching on election night. I posted on Substack. I'm like, why isn't anyone talking about the fact that it's hopeful in my opinion. There's this political realignment going on that's a class realignment. I've been a lifelong Democrat, and then became an independent. But the reason I liked the Democratic Party was that not only was it diverse, but it was one that really seemed to at least pay attention to class. And it's so funny now to see the Democratic Party become the party of the elites without it's weird. It's like their constituents, a large portion of their constituents, are not even aware that this shift has occurred. That's what's so strange. It's they're not. It's but yet the people outside the party, it's very clear to them. So
Yes.
election night, I'm watching, and to see all of these 46% of Latinos, not Latino men, but just Latinos, leaving the Democratic Party. Granted, only 20% of Black people, but that's still considerable.
Yeah.
62% of Native Americans. I mean, granted, there are not a lot of Native Americans in this country, but if anyone knows about racism, discrimination,
Yes.
inequities, it would be our Native American brothers and sisters, and they have left the Democratic Party. Asians, it was I did, and to hear that, oh, that if you left the Democratic Party, you're racist, you're misogynist. I'm like, oh my God, they are missing something huge that's going on. I mean, and I mean, if you're a student of history, you know that parties are never, static. They're always changing. Republicans and Democrats, they haven't always represented the same things. The Republicans freed slaves, and then the
Hmm.
Democrats became the party of the New Deal. And it clearly we're seeing another shift again, and it's based on class, pure and simple. And I don't
Yes.
know.
Yeah.
Ideally, we'll have a third party. That's what I'm hoping, because look, whatever you think about Trump, the Republican Party, I think, is just as dangerous as the Democratic Party, in my opinion. Um, I think there needs to be a unity party, a party for all of these disaffected Americans who have the same, and there are a lot of us.
There are so
We are the
many.
Yes.
majority, and we look
Yes.
like everybody and everything, and we're in every state, we're every
This
sex or
this is
gender.
what was so exciting about the 99% movement when that was going on. Do you guys
Oh,
remember that? And then
I don't remember that.
it
I've never heard of
Yes.
it.
that would have been like 2010 maybe.
Like Occupy time.
Yeah, and then it was
It,
quickly quashed, and we got the new anti-racism. And it was like, oh,
Oh,
don't look over
interesting.
here, don't look at class. Let's talk about other things. And then you watch this whole divide happen. It was just who remembers that? Do y'all
I
remember
don't
the
remember.
99?
I remember Occupy Wall Street, but I don't remember the
Yeah, maybe
99%.
that was it.
I
Maybe that's what it
remember.
was.
Anyway.
Occupy Wall Street, and they also would talk about the 99%, and it was this big
99%.
focus
Yes.
on how the middle
Yeah.
class was being squeezed out.
Yes.
Oh, you were so right, and you're right. That was quickly
Yes.
displaced by anti-racist and identity groups. You're right,
Mm-hmm.
because as soon as you start, that's kryptonite. As soon as you start talking about class, what it will do is it will unite people. And right
Yes.
now we're in a society that thrives on division, because division, it's divide and conquer, is what will
That's
keep
right.
the truly elite class in place, just
Well,
to keep us fighting.
Yes.
And divide and
Yes.
That's right.
conquer.
Keep us all distracted and arguing over,
Yes.
crazy, crazy things, while meanwhile people's, ability to really make a living and be financially
Yes.
The
independent
real
or support a
issues.
family
Yep.
are being, hollowed out. It used to be in the 70s, a student could work through the summers and fund their own college education. Can you
Absolutely.
imagine? Yeah, you could waitress or do construction and you could pay your way through college.
Nope.
Can
So
you flip
true.
and
Not now.
imagine doing that now? There is no way. And that is
No.
really sad. I mean, college is actually becoming inaccessible to people, or you take on huge student loans,
That-
which
Yeah.
drastically alter your financial status over a lifetime, because that's all money you could have been investing, and instead you're paying back
Absolutely.
these student loans. And then there's people that are having trouble getting married because somebody doesn't want to marry a partner who has $200,000 in student
in
loans.
debt. Yeah.
And it's delaying people being able to have children. So then they're really going to need to replace people, our own
There you
citizens,
go, and that's
with
where immigrants come
more
in.
immigrants. Yep.
And
So-
student loans, by the way, unlike corporate debt or any other sort of type of debt, are not dischargeable in bankruptcy. And
That's
that's something that changed
100%.
25
Right.
years ago. The banks
Yes,
lobbied
Yes.
Congress
Yes.
for that
Yeah.
change.
Yeah, when I worked in community mental health, I had a few clients who were absolutely severely and permanently disabled, and they could not get rid of their student loan debt. And some of them hadn't even been able to complete college due to their disability,
Oh,
and
that's
they
terrible.
couldn't get rid of the debt, and it was just a
You
horrible
can't.
stress that they were
You
carrying.
can now, if you have SSDI. Now, if you're approved for SSDI, they will allow you to discharge. That's a very
That is
recent new
wonderful.
law.
I'm
Yes,
so glad to
and
hear it.
it's new, but yes, now you can. There's a special discharge with a total and permanent disability clause. I know somebody very close to me who actually just went through that. So
That is
Oh,
helpful.
thankfully, that's
wonderful.
the option. Yeah,
I'm
but
so happy to
yeah,
hear that.
yeah,
Yeah, I'm looking at some of the comments. Yeah, it's
yeah.
some of our viewers are very well aware of the Federal Reserve, which is yeah,
Yes,
that needs to go. A
What
lot of
is
people
your
don't realize.
What's
Oh,
your
go ahead.
advice,
yes, that needs to
Monica,
go
for
too.
people who are seeing this have the perspective that we're all sharing right now? What do you have any thoughts about practical steps that people can take in order to, I don't know, start to chip away at this or change things?
I think it's awareness. I think that the alignment we're seeing right now based on class is all happening because people are actually we're talking about these issues. And I'm sure I'm not telling you anything you don't know. If it weren't for the rise of podcasts and alternative media, we would not be having these conversations.
Yeah.
There's
Yes.
a reason legacy
Yep.
media is going extinct as a result. But
Yeah.
it's the truth is very powerful, and as soon as people, more of us, start to talk about the truth, it will catch fire like light in a dark room. So I wanted to start this broadcast today by saying I'm actually extremely optimistic. I'm long America. I'm extremely optimistic about this. I'm a short-term pessimist, but I'm a long-term optimist. Very optimistic about what I'm seeing, the level of awakening, and it is an awakening. And it's like once you see something, you can't unsee it. Once you've
Hmm.
awakened to what's happening, you can't go back to sleep. And we have now, I believe, reached a critical mass of awakening in this country, and it will begin to accelerate. Which is why, I mean, I woke up this morning and my partner said, "Oh my God, have you read the New York Times? Do you realize that Biden is now encouraging or sending long range missiles to Zelensky so he can accelerate and a
Yes.
conflagration with Russia, just as we've Trump has come in and said, like, we need to. I've been saying for the longest time, we can't win this war. Ukraine can't
Hmm.
win it. You need to negotiate this. Now it looks like on the cusp of negotiation, this is probably going to like ignite into a larger war before inauguration. I'm just praying, I'm hoping and praying that Vladimir Putin has the presence of mind not to take this bait,
Mm.
Yes.
because this would a World War III. I mean, that would set us back tremendously, as you can imagine. It
Yes.
would undo all of the progress I think we are making now by coming together. Anyway, so get back. What we can do, we can keep talking and raising awareness because our power is being unified. That is
Mm.
our power. It's not, I mean, it would be great if we had money. It would be great if we had a lot of other things, but our power is in Americans and humanity in general, just coming together and realizing how much we have in common, that our challenges are very similar. And
Hmm.
yeah, that's what makes me really optimistic because I see that happening.
That rings true to me, and I appreciate the white pill.
The
After
white, I like that. The
What's
white
your
pill.
when you say long? How many years do you think it starts to get to be good?
I mean, I'm gonna take the Martin Luther King approach to this. The night before he was assassinated, he said, I may not make it to the mountaintop with you, but
Hmm.
you will get there. And I
Gotcha.
Oh,
think if we looked where we are now, as opposed to where we are 60 years ago, we are in a tremendously, particularly if you were a woman or someone of color, you're in a tremendously better position now. It's not gonna. We didn't. I'll put it this way: we didn't get to this point overnight. It took decades. When we look back, we realize, wow, we've been asleep at the wheel for a while. I think it's going to take decades to unwind this. So
Mhm.
I wouldn't say what happened in our lifetimes, but I do think we will see
Mm.
progress in our lifetimes. But we do this not for ourselves, but for for our children
yes,
and people we may never meet. And that's the
yes.
selfless part of this. I think we have to acknowledge and own. It's not going to be quick. But this is you know what? I was in Philadelphia on Saturday. I hadn't been there since college. I don't know if any of you have been to Philadelphia. If you've
I
spent
have
any
It's a
time
long
there.
time.
Yes.
Once, long time ago, years.
Did you ever visit Independence? I'm a history buff, always have been, but I love American history. If you've ever visited Independence Hall, I think it's something that our federal government should make a point of providing funds for every public school, every student to make one trip before they
Yes.
graduate to Independence Hall. Ladies, it was the most powerful experience, one of the most powerful experiences in my life, to sit in the room where the Declaration of Independence was signed and where the Constitution was drafted and signed. And it was, so we're very close to, what is it, to 250th anniversary of this country. And our founders had no clue that we would make it this long. They really thought it was a serious gamble, um, truly an experiment in the textbook sense of the word. They were, and anyway, in this tour, it was like a recap of all the American history I'd had, a reminder. But when these gentlemen came together from these 13 colonies, they were they weren't all in agreement about independence. They're very much like we are now. There were some, like in Massachusetts, John Hancock, John Adams, um, Sam Adams, who their countrymen, the Patriots, had just had an ugly encounter at Concord and Lexington, and they're like, "Oh my God, it's about to go off the chain. We're the Redcoats. This is serious," and they were trying to express this to their brethren in the South who were far away from it, the ones who were in the Middle Atlantic. They're like, "We really need help." So it was a matter of getting them all on the same page about, all right, let's help our Massachusetts colony. But beyond that, there was a real sense among the colonists that, you know, maybe the crown really just doesn't understand what's happening. Maybe King
Mm.
George, if he only knew like how we're being put upon, he would step in. It's just a lack of information. But there were others who believed, like in Massachusetts, the colonies are like, no, no, he knows exactly what's going on, and we need to take action. But they hashed this out like for months, and it was consensus building, like we in a way we really need to find again today. These men who came together despite their small states, large states, states that used most that had capitalized mostly on slavery, states that were beginning to get away from slavery. They all came together and they found a common mission to keep this country alive. And anyway, it just reminded me, if we could come together then, under even more challenging circumstances, we had an imperial power that was looming over us and that had the wherewithal to wipe us off the face of the map. We probably wouldn't have even survived without the help of France. But if we could come together then, I know we can come together now. This country is so incredibly special. The older I get, the more I realize
Mhm.
just how special it was. I was on the way back from Independence Hall. I was talking to a Lyft driver. I love talking to Lyft and Uber drivers who mostly are immigrants, by the way.
Yes.
They almost all are, and they love this country more than anyone else. And I
Yes.
was speaking to a Vietnamese Lyft driver who was talking about how, yeah, Philadelphia's gotten really dirty, and I've been here for 15 years, and it's this and it's that. But you know what he said? I still love this country. I love this country more than you can possibly imagine. And I said, why? And he says, because we're free here. He's like, people complain about the freedoms, but you try going back to my country. You got to try going back to Vietnam. You go to these other places. And
Mhm.
it made me realize this, ladies, this is what we're fighting for. This is why we're here. We can have homelessness. We can have problems with our food. We can have problems with crime. We can have poverty. We can have so many problems. But as long as we keep the bones of this country intact, we have freedom of speech, which is my most important issue. We will always have the foundation to make this country wonderful, you know, make it great. And that's something that's an opportunity or a foundation that no other country in the world has. So we should be tremendously grateful, and again, optimistic.
Yeah.
That's right.
I'm going to say I've
And we
been
should
Monica
preserve
pilled.
it.
Huh?
Yes.
Oh,
Deborah?
Oh, sorry, I said
yeah.
I've been Monica pilled. You have white pilled,
Oh,
black
Monica
pilled. I've been
Bill.
Monica
Oh,
pilled.
Yeah.
yes.
You're all
Yeah.
going to be loving America.
I grew up that way with such a deep appreciation for this country. So I think one of the things I've really struggled with is when people kind of walk around saying I hate America. And my parents, having been here as immigrants, taught us to love this country. They love this country, even though it wasn't perfect and they, had a lot of challenges, but it was we're free here, Christine. That's what matters the most. And that was something that I always carried with me. So I feel particularly connected to that message.
Oh,
Yeah.
even as we see some of our freedoms disappear,
Yeah.
the fact that we have the fact that we're keeping the First Amendment in place allows us to, which is why it was a First Amendment. Imagine after you declared your independence, you've cobbled together a constitution. You're doing it so quickly, you haven't thought of everything. But the first thing that our founding fathers did after they completed the Constitution was like, all right, what do we need? We need freedom of speech. That's
Yes.
because without that, nothing else matters.
That's
And
right.
then
It's
then it gets me to
foundational.
the foundation and the very Second Amendment. People argue about the purpose of the First Amendment or the Second Amendment. Was it the militia, this, that? I'm like, look, if it came right after freedom of speech, that tells me that the purpose of the Second Amendment was to make sure that you kept the First Amendment in place.
That's right. That's right. That's right.
Monica, I can't tell you
Anyway,
how much I
Absolutely.
enjoy having you.
Yes,
It's-
absolutely.
It's
Oh,
What
we
a
loved
treat.
having you.
a complete
Yeah.
pleasure. I'm sure under your leadership, FAIR will be a force to be reckoned with,
Yes,
and
yes.
a force
I'm
for
hoping
real
so.
good. It's incredible. I love talking
Thank you
with
so
you,
much.
and I love your story. You are such a good storyteller. You're such a good orator, and you've just taken us through levels and layers of here's the problem and diagnosing the problem, and then optimistic solutions and perspectives on things from
Yeah.
this personal thing that your family grappled with, which is something that many families are grappling with, all the way to the national level and where we are as a culture. And I really admire and appreciate your perspective so much.
God, that means so much to me.
Yes.
Thank you. Thank you.
Yes.
From the bottom of
Thank
my
you,
heart.
Monica, so
Thank
much.
you. And
Thank
thank
you.
you,
Thank you
everyone.
so much.
Everyone who joined
right.
us in the chat, thanks so much for being here, and we will be back with you next week. All right.
Take care.
Bye.
Take care.